You were never meant to know about the Sullivan basement. In fact, there are men, powerful men, who would rather this story be erased entirely. Yet here you are, seconds away from hearing something that will change you. The kind of change that never reverses. Picture this. Virginia, 1834. Midnight. A storm rips through the hills. In a modest farmhouse, a candle flickers, shadows stretching along the walls like they're alive. Below, somewhere deep beneath the floorboards, there's a sound. Not the howl of wind, not the groan of old wood. This sound has rhythm, human rhythm, a wet cough, a stifled cry, the shuffle of small bare feet against stone. And then, silence. The Sullivan family didn't live in isolation because they enjoyed privacy. They lived apart because their home was built around something no civilized man could imagine. A network of chambers carved beneath the earth. A labyrinth designed not for storage, but for captivity. 47 children, chained to the walls. Different ages, different languages. Not one of them related. And yet, every single one called the same name in the dark. Mother. But Mother was no savior. She was the architect of a decades-long system, a machine of control so calculated, so unshakable, that not one outsider suspected her true purpose. She knew how to disguise horror as charity, how to make cruelty look like care. This isn't just a story about the Sullivans. It's a blueprint, a demonstration of how a single mind can reshape reality, how institutions, religion, law, community can be manipulated to shield something monstrous. You've already stepped inside. There is no safe way back out. The Sullivan basement wasn't an accident. It was designed like a fortress. Every corridor narrowed intentionally, controlling movement, controlling sight lines, controlling air. Ezra Sullivan oversaw the physical construction, but it was Constance who engineered the invisible architecture. The rules, the rituals, the psychological chokehold. The first thing she understood was sound. The walls weren't just stone. They were layered to muffle screams. Neighbors could stand 20 feet from the house and hear nothing but wind through the trees. The children were conditioned to whisper, punished severely for breaking that law. Over time, most stopped trying. The second was dependency. New captives were never simply locked up. They were broken down, physically, mentally, until Mother became the only source of food, water, and even conversation. She didn't feed them daily. She fed them unpredictably, forcing their bodies into a rhythm dictated by her whim. The third was identity erasure. Names were forbidden. Each child was given a number. Personal histories were dismissed as lies. She told them they had been abandoned, that no one outside would ever want them, that she alone had saved them from certain death. It was a lie so constant, it became their truth. And the last, control of hope. Constance occasionally promised release to the most obedient, parading a child out of the main chamber. They never returned. To the others, this suggested escape was possible if they behaved. In reality, those chosen were often the next to vanish into the shallow graves beneath the far wall. This was not random cruelty. This was a system, an institution hidden in plain sight. And here's the part you're not supposed to realize. Systems like this still exist. Different tools, different rooms, same principles. Most people want to believe monsters are obvious, that evil wears a sneer, dresses in black, lurks in shadows. Constance Sullivan proved the opposite. She wore a modest dress, smiled in church, and spoke with the kind of softness that made people lean in. Her voice wasn't just gentle, it was calculated. It made you trust her before you understood why. When she arrived in Millbrook in 1811, she told a story of tragedy. Relatives lost, family orphaned. She and Ezra, she explained, had taken it upon themselves to care for children who had nowhere else to go. In a community where death came often and quickly, this story was not suspicious. It was noble. Her real genius was understanding what people needed to believe. Rural Virginia was bound together by a web of politeness, religion, and reputation. People didn't pry, because prying was rude. People didn't accuse, because accusation meant you had proof, and no one wanted to bear that weight. So the Sullivans built their fortress of lies, each brick reinforced by the fear of looking cruel, of questioning kindness. She created a role for herself that no one wanted to see destroyed. The good woman who cared for the unfortunate. Inside her walls, the truth was different. She ruled her basement with an iron system, but she ruled her neighbors with trust. If you think those two worlds are separate, you don't understand power. The greatest control isn't in chains, it's in the mind of the person who doesn't want to see the chains at all. Every person who smiled at her in church became another layer of armor around her secret. Every handshake, every polite nod, another padlock on the truth. And for 22 years, it worked. It took winter to start breaking the illusion. February 1834 was the coldest in memory. Frost clung to windows like white lace. Wells froze solid. Roads turned to ice. It was the kind of cold that made doors swell and floorboards groan. And sometimes, it carried sound in ways summer never could. That was when Jacob Stern, a traveling merchant, knocked on the Sullivans' door. He was wet, shivering, and nearly snowblind. Hospitality was not optional in weather like this. Constance invited him in. Ezra barely spoke. Dinner was silent, except for the wind pressing against the walls. But that wasn't all Stern heard. Beneath the table, beneath the floor, there was another noise. Soft at first, then steady. A whimper, a cough, a sound no wind could make. He asked casually about the children. Constance smiled thinly. "Sleeping," she said. "Fever." Her tone closed the subject. Stern lay on a makeshift bed in the parlor, the fire burning low. Every so often the sound came again. Small, muffled, desperate. When he mentioned it over breakfast, Ezra waved it off. Old houses talk in storms. Stern left, but the sound stayed with him. 3 weeks later, another crack in the illusion appeared. A young Irish girl, Mary Catherine Flynn, vanished near the Sullivan property. Her family begged for help. Search parties combed the frozen woods, found nothing. The assumption was easy. She'd fallen to the cold or to wild animals. It was easier to believe that than to consider what was right under their feet. The basement didn't break open that winter, but winter had made it vulnerable. The cold had carried the whispers farther than Constance calculated, and once sound escapes, so does suspicion. The final blow came in April. William Hutchinson, a farmer with a hunter's patience, was tracking rabbits near the Sullivan property when he heard something that rooted him to the spot. It was a scream, high-pitched, jagged, unmistakably human. He froze behind a stand of oak, heart pounding. The scream came again, not playful, not angry. This was terror. He edged closer, the smell of damp earth and spring thaw in the air. It wasn't coming from the house. It was coming from beneath it. Then, movement. Ezra Sullivan, emerging from a low cellar door on the side of the house. He looked both ways like a man avoiding a rifle barrel, then ducked back inside. Hutchinson waited an hour, but the screaming never resumed. When he told his neighbors, the reaction was split. Some thought the children were simply difficult, and discipline was being handled. Others began to remember things: how much food Constance bought, the medicine, the fact that none of the children were ever seen in school or church. Finally, Sheriff Benjamin Crawford was told. At first, he dismissed it as gossip, but Hutchinson insisted on filing a complaint. On April 8th, Crawford and his deputy rode out to the Sullivan farm. Constance met them smiling, coffee ready. She repeated her orphan story, even produced letters she claimed were from relatives arranging adoptions. Then Deputy Webb saw it. The cellar door, triple padlocked, chained tight, the wood around the lock scarred with claw marks. That was the moment the performance cracked. The decision to break the locks wasn't taken lightly. In 1834 Virginia, a man's home was his castle, and forcing entry without undeniable cause could ruin a sheriff's reputation. But those claw marks told a story no paperwork could match. Sheriff Crawford asked Ezra for the key. Ezra's jaw tightened. Constance interjected, her voice sweet but trembling. "There are medicines and dangerous tools in there, for the safety of the children." The excuse might have worked if the deputy hadn't spotted something else. A pale, thin hand, gripping the cellar's inner bars before vanishing back into shadow. That was the end of patience. Crawford drew his pistol and ordered Ezra to stand aside. The man didn't move. For a long second, it looked like the two might come to blows. Then Constance, her face unreadable, produced a heavy iron key from her apron and handed it over. The first lock clicked open with a sound that seemed to echo into the bones of everyone present. The second fell away. The third chain rattled to the ground. When Crawford pulled the door open, a smell hit them. Rot, mildew, unwashed bodies, sickness. Darkness swallowed the steps ahead. A candle was lit. Its light revealed a sight none of them could erase. 6 children, all in various states of starvation. 2 were chained to the wall. 1 was too weak to lift his head. Another's wrists were wrapped in dirty bandages, crusted with blood. And in the far corner, sitting in shadow, was a girl of maybe 16. Eyes wild, lips cracked, hair hacked short. She hissed when the light hit her. "Please," one of the smaller children whispered, voice breaking. "Don't send us back." For the first time, Constance Sullivan said nothing at all. Word spread faster than the law could move. By the next morning, half the county had heard that the Sullivan cellar held white-eyed ghosts. Crawford ordered the children removed immediately. Some could walk, though slowly. Others had to be carried on stretchers. One died before reaching town. His heart simply stopped once the chains were gone. In the chaos, neighbors tried to understand. How had this gone unnoticed for so long? The Sullivans had lived among them for over 2 decades. They'd traded goods, attended church picnics, even hosted sewing circles. Yet in all those years, no one had seen a single one of the children Constance claimed to be raising. The truth began to unfold in pieces. Survivors whispered about being brought here under the promise of adoption. Some came from nearby towns. Others had been sent from overcrowded orphanages further east. Once inside, they were stripped of their names, their clothes, their past. They became labor, forced to sew, clean, and work the small plot of land. Ezra enforced silence with beatings. Constance enforced obedience with food. Days without work meant days without eating. And always, the door stayed locked. The girl in the corner, who later gave her name as Ellen, claimed there had been many more before her. Some were given away when they grew too weak. Others were taken out at night and never returned. She didn't know where. What no one could understand, what still chills historians today, was the question that lingered after the arrests. If the Sullivans were merely after free labor, why had so many children vanished entirely? No one wanted to say the word murder aloud. But in Millbrook, it began to hang in the air like smoke after a fire. The Sullivans were arrested on April 10, 1834. Ezra remained silent during questioning, speaking only to ask for water. Constance, however, tried to spin a final tale. She claimed the children were special cases, mentally unfit for society, sent to her by distant relatives or charitable boards to be kept safe from ridicule. The sheriff's desk was soon buried in letters from other counties, each from frantic families asking if their missing children might be among the rescued. Most had waited years for news. Only 3 of the surviving 6 could name their original homes. The rest had been taken so young, or kept so isolated, They had no memory of where they came from. A search of the Sullivan property turned up evidence that made the townspeople sick. Beneath the floorboards of an unused shed, deputies found a child-sized shoe, a cracked wooden doll, and a scrap of faded fabric that matched the dress Mary Catherine Flynn had been wearing when she disappeared. Most damning was the small pit behind the barn. Inside were bone fragments, too small to belong to livestock. The coroner's report didn't use the word human. It didn't have to. When the evidence was presented, Constance's face remained still, but witnesses swore her hands twitched as though she were sewing. Ezra simply stared at the wall. They were charged with unlawful imprisonment, abuse, and suspicion of murder, though, in the absence of complete bodies, the last charge was left unproven. But Millbrook didn't need a court to decide. In the minds of its people, the Sullivans were already condemned. The trial of Ezra and Constance Sullivan began in late summer 1834. The courthouse, a squat brick building at the center of Millbrook, had never seen such crowds. People traveled from neighboring towns just to catch a glimpse of the Millbrook monsters. The prosecution called witness after witness, farmhands, storekeepers, even the town's seamstress, each testifying to strange deliveries, unusual requests, and whispered warnings ignored. But the most damning testimony came from Ellen, the eldest surviving girl. Speaking with a voice still hoarse from years of neglect, she described the punishments: days without food, being made to kneel on salt, having her hair hacked off with shears when she tried to run. She spoke of the others, children who had grown too weak, given to the nightmen, who came with covered carts. When asked if she knew what became of them, Ellen paused for a long, trembling moment before answering. They didn't come back. The defense argued that the children were delicate wards in need of strict discipline, and that the Sullivans had provided shelter when no one else would. But the photographs of the cellar, the scars on the children's wrists, and the bone fragments spoke louder than any lawyer could. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours. Ezra Sullivan was sentenced to life in prison with hard labor. Constance received the same, though many whispered she was the true mastermind. But justice, as Millbrook soon learned, would not be the end of the story. Ezra lasted only 4 years behind bars. In 1838, he was found dead in his cell. No signs of struggle, no illness, simply gone. Some believed his heart gave out. Others claimed fellow inmates, disgusted by his crimes, had found a way to make it look natural. Constance, on the other hand, lived much longer. Prison records show she adapted quickly, taking over the laundry and even offering to mend guards' uniforms. But guards complained of her unsettling manner, saying she hummed lullabies to herself while working and whispered names of children who weren't there. She never expressed remorse. Instead, she maintained that the children were better off inside than out in the wicked world. In 1851, she died quietly in her cell at age 63. No relatives claimed her body. She was buried in an unmarked grave on prison grounds. The surviving children were sent to various homes and institutions. 3 lived into adulthood, though all reportedly struggled with nightmares and mistrust of strangers. 1, Ellen, vanished from public record after age 22. As for the Sullivan property, it sat abandoned for years. Locals avoided it, swearing they heard knocking from beneath the cellar door on quiet nights. Eventually, the county sold it at auction, but every owner seemed to last only a few months before selling again. By the turn of the century, the land had returned to weeds and ruin. But some said the earth there still refused to grow grass in certain spots, especially near the pit behind the barn. For decades, the Sullivan story was passed down in hushed tones at kitchen tables and around campfires. Parents used it to warn children about trusting strangers. Teenagers dared each other to approach the crumbling farmhouse, though few stayed long enough to touch the door. In 1924, a traveling journalist named Harold Vance visited Millbrook to document its dark folklore. He interviewed elderly townsfolk who remembered the arrests and even managed to find one of the surviving boys, now an old man. That man refused to set foot on the property. He claimed that in his dreams, he still saw Constance standing at the top of the cellar stairs, holding a lantern, her voice like honey as she called him by the name she'd given him, Thomas, though it had never been his. Vance wrote a scathing piece for a regional magazine, accusing the state of failing to protect vulnerable children. His article reignited interest in the case, and once again, strangers began traveling to Millbrook to see the site for themselves. By then, the farmhouse was barely standing. The cellar door was gone, but the entrance remained, a yawning black mouth in the earth. Some visitors claimed to hear faint crying from within. In his final notes, Vance wrote something he never published. I felt something in that cellar. Not just the memory of cruelty, but the presence of the children themselves. They are still waiting to be let out. He died less than a year later, found slumped over his typewriter. A single unfinished sentence in the carriage. They've learned how to call your name. By the 1970s, the Sullivan property had been almost completely reclaimed by nature. Only the foundation stones, a portion of the chimney, and the cellar entrance remained. But that didn't stop the legends. Local teenagers, fueled by ghost stories and boredom, made the site a popular dare. Some swore they saw pale faces peering from the cellar's darkness. Others claimed to feel a sudden grip on their ankles when standing near the entrance. One boy, 17-year-old Daniel Cross, disappeared there in 1978. His friends said he'd gone into the cellar with a flashlight and never came back. Police searched for days but found nothing, not even the flashlight. His mother later told reporters she'd been woken one night by a knock at her bedroom door. When she opened it, no one was there. But down the hallway, she saw a thin figure, a boy, vanish into shadow. She swore it was Daniel. Paranormal investigators began visiting in the 1980s, capturing strange EVPs, electronic voice phenomena. In one, a soft child's voice can be heard saying, "Hungry." In another, something whispers, "Don't send us back." Skeptics dismiss these as tricks of sound or suggestion, but those who've been there will tell you there's something in that cellar, and it doesn't care whether you believe. Some think it's the spirits of the children who never left. Others fear it's something older, something that fed on the Sullivans' cruelty and has been feeding ever since. Either way, few in Millbrook will walk that path alone after dark. In 2003, a real estate developer purchased the Sullivan land with plans to build a small subdivision. Locals warned him, but he laughed it off. Ghost stories didn't scare contractors. The first few weeks went smoothly. The old foundation was cleared, the well filled, and the cellar entrance sealed with concrete. Then, the workers started quitting. One man claimed he heard a child crying beneath the ground while he was driving a backhoe. Another swore that when he bent to tie his boot, he saw small dirty fingers reach up from the soil, only to vanish when he screamed. The developer pushed forward, hiring new crews, but progress slowed. Tools went missing. Machinery broke down without cause. Finally, a foreman brought him something he'd found while digging near the edge of the lot. A child's shoe, cracked with age, still holding the tiny bones of its owner. Work stopped immediately. Police were called, and within days, forensic teams uncovered at least 11 more shallow graves. The remains were too degraded for identification, but their size left no doubt they were children. The county halted all construction and declared the land unsuitable for development. The developer sold it at a loss, muttering to reporters, "It's cursed. They don't want to be disturbed." Since then, the land has remained empty, overgrown, silent, and avoided. But some nights, drivers on the nearby road report seeing lights bobbing through the trees, like lanterns swaying in the hands of someone searching. In 2011, a team of documentary filmmakers visited Millbrook to produce a low-budget horror series about America's most haunted places. The Sullivan site was episode 3. They arrived with thermal cameras, EMF meters, and night vision rigs, determined to spend the night in the overgrown ruins. Hours into filming, nothing unusual happened, just wind through the trees and the distant hum of insects. Then, around 2:14 a.m., one cameraman picked up faint whispers on his boom mic. When isolated later, the voices formed two distinct phrases. "It's cold," and "Stay with us." The team pressed deeper into the woods, stopping at the exact spot where the cellar had once been. Using ground-penetrating radar, they found an air pocket beneath the soil. Suddenly, their thermal camera flared with heat signatures. Dozens of small shapes clustered around them. The crew bolted. When reviewing the footage the next day, they discovered something chilling. In multiple frames, a pale woman can be seen standing among the shadows, holding what looks like an oil lantern. Her face matches sketches of Constance Sullivan from the trial. The episode never aired. The production company claimed technical difficulties, but crew members later admitted privately that the raw footage was not something anyone should see. One sound engineer quit the industry entirely, saying, "When we left, I swear one of them followed me home." In 2018, a local historian digitizing county archives stumbled upon a box of prison letters written by Constance Sullivan. Most were mundane, requests for fabric, complaints about the food. But one stood out. It was addressed to Ellen, the eldest survivor, dated 1849. "You are still mine. You may think you are free, but the cellar has a door you cannot see, and it will open for you when I call. I have been patient. Soon we will be together again, my dear Thomas." The letter's last line was smeared, as if Constance's pen had been yanked mid-word. The historian shared the find with the local newspaper, which published it alongside the story of the Sullivans. That same week, a woman claiming to be Ellen's great-great-granddaughter contacted the paper, insisting her family had been plagued for generations by the same recurring dream. A narrow staircase leading down into darkness, and a voice from below calling them by a name that was never theirs. She said that just before her mother died, she whispered one last thing: "Don't open the door." Today, the Sullivan property is little more than tangled brush and moss-covered stones. The county has posted no trespassing signs, but they don't stop everyone. Last year, a group of amateur ghost hunters live-streamed their midnight exploration of the site. Laughing, they pushed through the undergrowth, ignoring the warnings. Midway through, their signal began to flicker. The chat filled with messages from viewers claiming they saw small faces moving in the shadows behind the group. Then, the camera tilted abruptly downward. For 3 seconds, the live stream captured what looked like a wooden door set into the ground, something no longer supposed to exist. From beneath it came a faint knocking. The feed cut out. Authorities later found the group's car abandoned by the roadside. None of the three have been located. Locals say the knocking hasn't stopped. On quiet nights, if you stand close enough to where the cellar once was, you can hear it too. Slow, deliberate, and patient. Some believe it's the children still trying to get out. Others believe it's Constance Sullivan, waiting for someone foolish enough to answer. And if you ever hear her call your name, don't.